Right, it's 7:30. We'll start with meeting number 2 of the evening, which is Planning Committee. And apologies for absence, I think, from Councillor Fuller.
Yep.
But I think other than that, we're more or less a full house. Representations of interested parties, none. So declarations of interest, any disclosable pecuniary interests? Any other interests? I should say that one of the items relates to 4 Riverside Close.
For some reason.
Yes, so one of the plans we're looking at is 4 Riverside Close, so you might want to say something.
It's one away from you anyway, so but you might have a view on it. But I'll keep it very simple.
Right.
Well, the only thing that's come up for me is on 23 New Road. I actually know the man who bought that property and was doing that work, or was about to do that work. I don't know if that means anything. I don't know
Well, if you're acquainted with, you've made the position clear by flagging it up, so I think that's perfectly fine. Right, minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd July have been circulated. Present were myself, both Councillor Oakes, Councillor Humphreys, Councillor Baker, Councillor Glenn and Councillor Chesser. Anybody like to propose those, please? Councillor Humphreys, Councillor Glenn. All those in favour? She's with us. Bear with me a second. It's probably better for your neck, isn't it?
Yes.
Right.
It's not a very good idea.
Now that we're all arguably facing in broadly the right direction, we can move on to the planning applications. Hopefully the machine will work, and hopefully we'll start at 79 Benefield Road.
Right, so clearly a lot of you fancy one there now. Here we go. That's where it is. It's not in the conservation area, but it's graded listed. And I thought I'd just put these up, because there's nothing much more you can say about it. No change to the footprint, no change to the layout. Windows no. It will remain identical to its current state. The new proposal contains modern products.
This looks like a no objection subject
Is
to
there
any
a picture of
contrary
it?
view of the...
When you say it's staying the same, was there a picture of it? No.
No. I don't think so. If there was, for me, that's an overriding thing. They're not changing it really in any way.
So,
It's described as replacement of timber casement window by
Timber.
timber casement window.
but it's listed that the office will have something to say about that.
Which is why I suggested that perhaps we would say no objection subject to any contrary view of the Conservation Officer, which I think is
it's
an
quite
unlikely.
likely to say it's got to be like.
I'm sure he'll be, as long as he is happy that this is broadly a like for like as it looks like, I'm sure it will be okay.
I couldn't find any objections on this particular one anyway, so but, I mean, it looks straightforward.
Which can take us on to 1 East Road and a tree.
No.
In fact, more than one tree, to be fair.
We're over time on this, right? It's tree husbandry, it's not a fell. And Lisa has taken the sensible course in providing all the certainty on this issue. And there it is. it's too late for us to comment anyway, but I thought I'd put it up just for interest.
So we note the response we've actually put in, which would be in line with our normal policy anyway, and it does appear to be in the nature of tree husbandry, so we may as well move swiftly on. This appears to be the Angel Inn come back again.
Right, I know, I've had a problem with this, a major problem with this. I have gone through this. I'm trying to find out what has changed, and I can't see that anything has, and it's been extremely difficult to. Now I've been trying to ring the case officer at Patrick Reed, and he just never seems to be able to answer his phone. He's probably on holiday, but.
I think the explanation may well be this. Councillors may recall that this issue, I think, came up at full council because we are the owners of the car park, and ENC's reaction to the planning application when it initially came before them was to say to them, but have you actually consulted with, brought this application to the attention of the owners of the car park, etc., because it should be done. So we got formal notice as owners of the car park, came before full council, and we dealt with it. And now I think it's simply come back, effectively exactly the same application as before.
I couldn't find any difference.
So may I suggest that we simply respond to it in precisely the same terms as we did last time?
Could you remind me of what those terms were? I don't recall.
I probably couldn't do it word for word.
That doesn't matter.
The primary concern that we expressed was in relation to traffic movement serving the property. A, because we'd have hearses having to go right through the car park. B, because in order for a hearse to enter the property, it would have to go straight in under the sort of arch, if you like, past the co-op front door, and then you go immediately left into the property. There didn't seem to be an awful lot of room within the property for those vehicles. Coupled to which
I'll rattle through it.
We were concerned about people basically visiting the premises because it's going to include a chapel of rest. Therefore, it was likely that staff there, people visiting to pay their respects or otherwise, were all going to end up using the public car park, which we didn't necessarily feel was appropriate. And I think we generally felt that the location was wrong, even though perhaps in principle, had that been somewhere else, we would have said that having such a facility within the town would have been an advantage. I think that probably fairly sums it up.
Because they would have to drive against the traffic flow. I mean, because if they came in through the arch by the co-op, none of the delivery lorries that ever came to the pub came in that way. They all, again, disobeyed the rules and used to come in the back because you can't turn sharply enough when there are cars parked.
No, you can't. But
in the space.
and it's a
you can't
disabled
turn.
area as well.
It's the disabled area, which means there will be vulnerable people in that area, and you can't turn a large vehicle to go into the gate. It's far more complicated than just what you've said, actually.
Yes, no, I take on with that.
Can I ask a question? Why has it come back to us that we haven't had the fundamental questions answered?
Well,
It's come back. I think my understanding is that it came back, in a sense, purely procedurally because the applicant hadn't gone through all the required formalities. Therefore, ENC basically said, do them, and then we'll be able to look at the plan, with the result that it's effectively come back before us. But, you know,
So what's
logically, we would
redacted?
simply respond in the same way.
What's been redacted? Is that
no, do you know what?
Business.
You get this all the time, really, and I don't know why. It's possibly because they're naming people or something like that. That's often why it gets taken out. But I don't, materially, we're looking at the principle of having this company really. We're not overly bothered about the internal structure, I don't think, because we leave that to Lloyd Mills.
Yes. It's a locational thing.
It's a location.
As Councillor Charlton rightly pointed out, we own that entrance, and they've got to get permission from us. I still don't really like it, I must admit. But it's a pity to see the Angel, going to rot in some way.
Well, that would be solved for something else.
Exactly.
There are plenty of other uses which I suspect it could be put to, which would not have caused us as much angst as this one did.
I think the longer this goes on, for me personally anyway, the longer this goes on, when it keeps recurring, it sits on my shoulders worse and worse and worse each time. It doesn't sit. I'm still not convinced about this, and now even more so when you look at it again. There's not adequate parking within their property. I say there for visitors, for people, and they'd have to use the car park. And then, of course, the thing we forgot about in the original thing, there is a public loo right, not only disabled, but there's a public loo right there as well. So there is active traffic, pedestrian traffic crossing that bit all the time. It's quite a big little corner.
It's a very dangerous place.
And I think Councillor Chess is right. I think we should revisit.
Well, we might possibly want to.
Right,
I get the impression that we might want to review the original response, but only from the point of view of, quote unquote, beefing it up a bit by making those points.
Because you see that the access to the backyard is by two big metal gates. They actually have to open outwards into the car.
No, they're actually slides.
They're going to replace them with the sliding one.
I see it.
No, at the moment they don't, but
I think the plan is to change it. You're right, that would be a further problem if it stayed the same.
The other thing, of course, is that houses are not short.
No, well, that's why I say there's no
Put a
change.
stop to it by saying we will not agree access. It's our land.
Yeah, well, good.
I think the possible issue there is, it has come before full council, and I think the view that we took is that it's actually quite difficult to say that, bearing in mind that it is used by vehicles all the time, because it's its raison d'etre, because it's a public car park, and to sort of say that particular vehicles couldn't cross it, I think is a difficult concept. So I'm not sure that it's us in our position as owners of the land who are objecting. We're objecting on a whole raft of planning grounds to the suitability of those premises with this use, because it is a change of use that's being sought.
But it isn't right that it should have to come in through a no-way opening.
Well, certainly if they came in the other way...
Which is what they would have to do.
That wouldn't be appropriate.
Because you wouldn't be able to turn.
Yes.
I don't see how they can actually even hold a funeral, because if you've got 3 cars and they're picking the person up from the Chapel of Rest, they've got to go all the way through the car park, and 1 funeral a day is going to cause chaos, isn't it?
Absolutely.
When they're travelling through and trying to get in and out of the premises.
I totally agree, and I think we should be saying we're very concerned about the.
I think you're absolutely right, Chair, that we should just take the original and beef it up and these other objections.
If you could remember to send me a copy of what we did the first time,
I can probably find it.
and I will.
Yeah, I'll do that when we finish.
I will have it
I'll
somewhere,
email it
but
to
you'll
you.
probably get it quicker than
Yeah.
I'll find it, and we'll make sure that we send that off along those lines.
Do you want me to print it off now so you can have a look at it and get input? You can carry on doing
well,
these.
let's do it at the end of the meeting,
Yeah,
and then
okay.
we can sort that out. So let's press on to 27 Wentworth Drive, conversion of a garage to form a 2-storey annex. Gosh, that's never happened before. With a single storey linked to a dwelling.
Basically, Wentworth Drive is over there, and you can see the property is not actually really on Wentworth Drive, it's a little mini cul-de-sac. Now this is a pretty classic modern trend, That's all we've got at the moment, more or less. Well, it is. And what they propose to do is that. But basically, the garage is becoming living accommodation.
Let's go around the parking space.
Right. Hang on a minute. I anticipated this. Here we go. Oops. What's happened there?
Past it.
Come back. Sorry about the detail. I always find these things very informative. So many people are doing this these days. Quite a lot of them without planning permission. I spotted a couple.
We have relatively regularly taken issue with this kind of development, largely on two grounds. One is if the end result displaces traffic that ends up having to park on the road, i.e. a lack of suitable parking space. The other one, which has never really found any favour with the NC, but we repeat on a regular basis, is that development, as with most developments, is developed according to a whole, if you like, plan for the development. X number of two-bedroom houses, X number of three-bedroom houses, etc., in order to achieve what is considered to be the appropriate balance on the development. And then what happens is that years go by and properties get extended and the two-bedroom houses become three-bedroom houses and the three-bedroom houses become four-bedroom houses, etc., whether by this process or others. The original plan goes out the window and the supply of smaller properties within the town shrinks. And we've always had a worry about it. And we frequently said that on that basis alone we've objected. I have to say I don't think on any single occasion that argument has ever actually persuaded the NC, but sometimes you feel that restating it is nevertheless right. So, bearing in mind what our concerns are likely to be, A, as it were, the principle, and B, the adequacy of the parking, what do people feel?
I agree, but I just feel that we probably should just put rows and rows of seaside huts up and then let them gradually evolve into
Mansions.
mansions.
Into your house.
Mine has never been added to. Mine has never been added to.
I mean, but this is really quite an interesting discussion, in my opinion, and a very adult one.
Can I ask a question? Have there been a precedence in this area?
Have we?
Has there been a precedence in Wentworth Drive?
I don't.
I would struggle to say for sure. In a sense, I'd be surprised if not, but I couldn't turn around and say yes because it was done at number X.
I can tell you that there's been a lot of this sort of thing.
Yeah.
Certainly.
Well, you lived at Creed Road, and you've seen how many people have turned their garages into rooms, and
I live in Walker Close.
well, there we go. I mean,
But yes, people have done it there.
oh, plenty. And some of them, as I say, have not had planning permission. I'm actually looking at one when I'm sort of digging around, and I might go and stick a note through the door to say, I mean, they're going to come into trouble anyway if they try and sell, because solicitor
Yes.
is going to say, have you got planning permission for this?
Yes.
But the thing is, the planning regulations are becoming so much more relaxed now. That's one another. That's not a matter for us, is it? That's a matter for government. But they've taken their foot off.
On that whole estate, there are, I mean, particularly there's two developments on Monson Way at the moment
Yep.
that are extending the garages, and I think probably we gave permission to those.
I don't think we did.
So I know for a fact, because I walked
I think
through
there's-
it the
I
other
think-
day, and I was surprised.
I think I know one of them, and we didn't.
We've all, if where we have said no objection, we've always said except for we have to check that there's adequate
It's the
off-street
parking, isn't it?
parking.
Yeah.
It's always parking.
We've always added
and
that proviso.
it's always parking really. But I mean, fundamentally, the internal design, this is not a grey listed building or anything like that. The internal design and whatever else, I frankly don't have an issue with. But there are principles involved, as Councillor Chapel has clearly stated.
So,
I think I think we're pushing water uphill on this.
you may well be right. Doesn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't continue to make the observations.
Right.
But I'm not sure we've got a total consensus, in the sense that, is it a question of saying we would have no objection subject to the local planning authority satisfying itself that this plan does not create a planning issue? Or do we go, if we think it definitely does, then we might want to actually object, and do we append anything to it about bemoaning the fact that properties are generally becoming larger and, as I say, moving away from the development that it was intended to be?
I think it's a genuine point. It's worth a comment, because it's I suppose we have a certain responsibility to have that social conscience, even if the plan ultimately don't. But I think they need to be reminded that actually, as you say, there needs to be a mix of housing. And it's unfortunate because you can't deny someone extending their house if everyone else in the street has already done it. So,
I agree with you entirely. I mean, it's ironic, really, though, that the government has brought in the 40% affordable housing. Well, goodness knows what's affordable in Arundel. That's always made me laugh. And it's not a very, very ha-ha laugh. It's just a goodness gracious.
Before we end up going too far into sort of matters of principle and so on, we do need to make a decision on this. Councillor Gay.
Well, I don't think we need to talk about planning policy at all. It's quite simple. Lots of other people are doing it. We can't stand in the way. If we want to make comments about planning policy, we should go direct to ENC or the government. Not pick on somebody who's just trying to extend, do what everybody else is doing.
I think that's reasonable.
There's no objections from any of the neighbours or anything like that?
Not that I'm aware
As
of.
long as there's enough parking permission and so on. Yeah.
The sense that I'm getting is that to the specific application we would respond that there is no objection subject to the planning authority satisfying themselves that changing this will not result in inadequate parking on site.
Yes.
And let's leave it at that. And as you rightly observe, if we want to make a wider point, there might be other ways of doing it. Right. Right, there's some objection subject to parking, just to remind myself. The Great Hall, felling a tree to ground level.
Well, you notice I put fell in red because we always get worried about anything that says fell to do with trees. But the tree does not look terribly well. It's had a full assessment. It's part of you call it more or less, call it a coppice. You can see where it's located next to the Great Hall. To the right of it as you face the Great Hall. And it's not a happy tree. Don't know what to say. We're going to do the subject of the views of the tree.
I mean, when you say it's not a happy tree, is that simply by observation, or is that part of some sort of tree report by...
Well, it is, the tree report says it's not happy.
Has had a full arboricultural assessment.
I was trying to avoid using the word, actually.
I was trying to avoid that. No, it's had a...
I can see.
The assessment was from a highly qualified, chap who does these things.
This sounds very much like no objection subject to the views of the tree officer.
I can't think of
Again.
any other thing to say.
Right, let's move swiftly on,
This is you now.
which is 4 Riverside Close. Installation of air conditioning units at low level, removal of existing 4 air conditioning units at high level to gable end between 3 and 4 Riverside Close.
I'm happy to defer to Councillor Chester on this one.
I have to say, I know this house. I've never met the owner. So I don't have any personal relationship with this person.
Well,
It looks, the house, as you drive up the road, like a factory, because it's got not only 4 air conditioning units plastered on the side, it also has, which is not mentioned there, an extremely tall aluminium coloured chimney with a sort of top on,
yeah, with a cabin on it.
which shouldn't be there either.
Is it noisy?
Well, now, hang on a minute.
Not to me it's not, because I've got double glazing.
Just a sec. Let me just show you. This is really what they're proposing. And I'm not going to go through the very long noise assessment, effectively, which has really driven this.
Well,
Fundamentally...
next door would find it noisy.
But that's it. So what they're intended to do is just basically take the high-level units and put them, much further down. And as the noise assessment says, that this would reduce the amount of noise and therefore annoyance to neighbours considerably.
But you still see them, and they look appalling, absolutely
Well,
appalling.
these are actually really down at ground level.
Well, you still see them, because of the houses are on a slope.
Well, I mean,
I know they have been told this to...
Well, I'm going to say,
Yeah.
it's Dallas, isn't it?
Yeah.
I suppose I could have marched through the detail of the noise assessment, but that would be ridiculous. I mean, it's quite a long document.
I think it's also probably fair to say that none of us are probably
Experts.
sufficiently expert to be able to make sense of it. Whereas one would rather hope that ENC would. So,
They were
no doubt,
originally told to remove them because of the look.
no doubt.
Right, that hasn't changed.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't say that in the application, I can tell you that.
Well, let's take it in bits. In terms of the noise side of it, I am not qualified, and I doubt that anybody here is qualified to say whether what is proposed will make the situation better or worse. We sure as hell wouldn't want to make it worse. So I think we ask ENC to satisfy itself that this will either be neutral in terms of its impact or will actually improve the noise situation for neighbouring properties. That's one thing. The second issue, in a sense, perhaps, is, well, should we have something on there that is effectively considered somewhat unsightly? Now, we have the difficulty that there's something there at the moment, so you could argue, well, by moving it lower, it might perhaps make it slightly less obtrusive. On the other hand, if it shouldn't have been there at all in the first place,
They were meant to be
simply
up the
moving it from A to B, because it might be slightly better in that location, may not necessarily be the whole answer.
Basically, David, it might improve the sound because it'll muffle it a bit. In terms of the look, it's absolutely not in keeping with the
Well, certainly when you look at that property,
with the road.
as
Anyway,
against any other property in that street, it does look very different, Councillor Day.
Has it actually got, have they got planning permission?
No, they were refused planning permission.
So they
They
put them
put
in
them on anyway.
Well, that's fundamental, isn't it? We don't then, two wrongs
Well,
don't right, we've got to take those down.
And their
Not
excuse
put them on.
was there wasn't anywhere else to put them, so I'm told.
Well,
But of course, there's the whole of the back of the house. I mean, it's not.
absolutely.
So if they've breached the planning permission, they should be removed, simple, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah, but that's.
Well, we can. There's no difficulty in our responding to this application by saying that if the units that are being replaced were actually installed initially in breach of planning,
Yeah.
then we would be concerned about authorising a replacement on the basis that it adversely impacts upon the street scene, it is not consistent with the other properties, and if such equipment is to be installed, it should be installed in a different location as unobtrusively as possible, and that's in addition to the comments about the sound. But
the thing is, at least they have put in a planning application.
well, yeah,
Well, they've
but
got
then perhaps
to,
they've been
because
pushed
they've
into
been
doing
taken
it.
They have put in a planning application to change the position of basically illegal.
Yeah, and there's the
so
chimney.
Those should be removed, and they should be putting a fresh planning application in to put these in.
I might be imagining it, but I thought I saw one of those, was it in the enforcement notices?
They
where
have
tell
been.
them to take,
There was an
tell them to take it
there
down.
was
I have a feeling
Yeah.
that is right.
And I believe, I think, if I'm thinking about the timing, they're out of time as well in terms of the enforcement.
Complying with the enforcement.
I think they are. The thing is, we weren't very happy about this from the outset, were we?
No.
There was a lot about this development.
There was a lot about it. I mean, in a way, the property destroys the street scene
It does.
completely. It's just a big, massive statement, and
Right.
that's
Let's go back one step then.
Yep.
And add to, in a sense, everything I said already, which is that if the units which it is now being proposed should be relocated, should not have been there, and if there has been enforcement action initiated which has not been complied with, then we would ask the NC to enforce the enforcement, if you like,
Yeah.
for what was done. Okay, this plan can be considered on its own merits or demerits, but that doesn't alter the fact that if, in fact, it was erected in breach, if there has been enforcement action taken and it hasn't been complied with, we would want ENC to do everything possible to force compliance.
Because you could also say, whilst lowering the units might, to some extent, mitigate the sound problem, that's not the only problem.
Oh no, absolutely
Yeah,
not.
that's the
But I think that's
So
clear
they're-
from
they're-
agree.
what we've
We
been
had
outlining.
We had an interesting air conditioning issue with a property that was in a close-off Copstock Road, and it was an elderly lady, and they put in a big air conditioning fan outside, and basically we managed to make sure that the environmental people went there to do an assessment about what the noise impact would be on the neighbours, and it would have been significant. So they then had to put louvered, door air things around it, so that they, muffled the noise. This thing. Well, I went up there after they put it in. They were still pretty rattly noisy.
Yeah.
But the thing is, though, to be honest, in the overall scheme of things, this is pretty minor compared to what they've actually done to this property.
But we
No,
can't.
we can't do anything
They
about
got
that.
permission for most of it, let's face it. Do
I think-
people
I think
agree
so.
with this sort of multi-strand approach then? That we talk about the fact that simply relocating it from A to B isn't necessarily acceptable if they shouldn't have been in A in the first place, and they need to
Yeah.
enforce. If there are to be such units, they will need to be located in a position that doesn't adversely impact the street scene, etc. And that we do not know whether the impact of locating them at a lower level will or won't have the benefits that are claimed, and we ask them to make their own inquiries to satisfy themselves, as I said, either.
Yeah,
That
see,
it's
I don't-
either going to not make it any worse, or it's actually going to improve the situation.
I don't want to end with that one, because that's not the important thing. The street scene is the important part.
Well, they've already
Not-
nailed that.
Yeah.
Well, it's almost a question of saying, look, we don't want them there in the first place, but if you are actually going to permit them to be there, then
To exist,
to
you
exist at all, then
They have to
they
be out
need
of
to be
sight.
they have to be out of sight, and they need to be
On the-
quiet.
I mean, they're very, very close. They've built right up.
Yeah,
Already, the actual house
It's-
is right up to the edge of the property. There's no gap.
It's astonishing.
Yeah.
They really,
They've literally, if that's the hedge or the fence, they're there. And there's the other house is about there.
Yeah. Well, yeah. All right. I don't know that we can get into that, but are people generally happy? Again, I suspect this is one of those ones where I'll work with Lisa on the wording later.
Absolutely.
I think what you've suggested is entirely appropriate.
Right. Guess what? The next application actually says it's a retrospective application, so that gets us off on the back foot before we start. This is
put it in red.
Yes, this is 23 New Road. Change of use from Chinese takeaway on ground floor to residential. First floor already being residential. Loft conversion, changes to windows and doors.
Right,
So let's look at the specifics and we'll
It's
talk about
already,
retrospective.
it's
Doing this
already
for
done.
ages.
It's already done.
I know it's already done,
Got some
but that
pictures.
doesn't mean to say that it has to stay done.
No.
Well,
Well, it doesn't, does it?
It's not done, though, is
It's
it?
not
They're
completed.
working on it.
They're
It
still
still
working
looks
on
like
it.
a Chinese restaurant.
I agree. Anyway,
what we're looking at.
let's look at
That's
this.
left the existing. The proposed, I put inverted commas because it's already been done, is what they do, and it's the left-hand property that you can see on both the diagrams. I mean, you could argue it possibly improves the street scene.
Well, I seem to recall that when when this got planning permission to be converted into the Chinese takeaway, I have a feeling that we didn't actually very much like it because we said that it was completely out of keeping
I agree.
with that street in the first place. So converting it back to residential actually would probably, in principle, be a good idea.
Personally,
Again,
I
Two issues here. One is the conversion back to residential. I've got no objection to that because really you can't use it for anything else these days. The other one is the retrospective loft conversion. So should we comment on two separately?
We usually motivate
well,
retrospectives.
Yeah, but let's deal
although it's not actually been added to there, we did actually say, and we have got a policy that says we will always automatically make observations about any retrospective
I think we
application.
should. Yeah.
And this one should be no exception.
We should, but there's the other issue of conversion of change of use.
However, the odd thing about this one is I rather suspect that none of us would feel that it's actually a bad idea because this is the only commercial shop-like frontage on New Road. There's nothing similar on, say, Gordon Avenue, Rock Road, or anywhere around there. It's a complete anomaly. And quite how it ever got permission in the first place is beyond me.
Well, there was one little grocer's, wasn't there?
Oh, actually, there was one on
Yeah,
Springfield Road,
yeah.
wasn't there, at
Springfield
one time,
Road.
that was converted into a house, so that's, yeah.
Used to be a spa.
Not, however, on New Road, I don't think, because this was a residential property at one time.
Well, it's not all work.
You can argue this is an improvement. You can argue.
Yeah, really.
My only feeling is it can't look worse than it does. But as long as they've done everything within the appropriate building regulations,
Well,
because
that, of course,
change of use has clearly not been applied for either.
Yes, I agree. Councillor?
The only thing I can say is really that you think that it would improve traffic up and down the roads.
Well,
People would obviously want to go drive there, park there, go in, and then
Absolutely.
whatever. So
Yeah.
I have to say, I don't know what else to say about it. It's
Improve the air, no smells.
Yeah. I get a distinct sense. We have no objection in principle to the change of use. We want to make sure, given that it's actually a lot of the work's already been done, that it's been done properly
Yep.
and in accordance with all relevant building regulations. And we deplore the fact that the application has been made retrospectively, etc.
Yeah.
Is it in fact, just as a comment out of interest, is it two flats or is it a single dwelling?
I think it's a single dwelling.
Because once again we fall back into parking issue.
Yeah.
If it's two flats, then we've got
I must admit, the way I,
4 more cars.
yeah, the way I read it, I thought it was going to become a single residential unit,
Yes.
Yeah.
rather than two separate ones.
Well, I mean, the thing is, though, they could turn it into two flats, couldn't they?
Yeah, no, I mean, just the way things are going at the moment. Every
think it would be
inch
so
of everything
small.
else is being converted into something.
Anyway, maybe.
It's just an observation. If it was two flats,
There is.
There is, but it's
Yeah.
tiny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty small. I
don't think.
think one of the issues they might have is things like waste management. That's one of the things, because the waste people would send a job up and down if people can't get their bins to the front and all this sort of business, or they leave them at the front. But
it does become difficult to object to it when it was residential in the first place.
Yeah,
Okay, I think
We've
the,
done that wrong.
the sentiment is established. We're probably quite keen on the idea of it changing back, provided it's done right and somebody gets their knuckles wrapped for doing it prematurely. 5 New Street, which is a listed building consent, amongst other things, removal of letterbox, replacement of steel sheeting over windows with single glazing.
Right, okay. Well, it's for the post office, of course.
it was going to be a restaurant, isn't it?
So somebody suggested to me it was going to become an Indian restaurant.
That's
correct.
Right, okay, I'll just go through the bit I've got. Obviously, I'm sure you'll know what this is. And clearly, it's no longer a post office, so it makes sense to remove the post box. Now, I've done some edited extracts from the design and access statement, which is quite wordy. Right, if I'll just gently take this through you. Okay, statement of intent. Use will not alter, which means that it won't become residential, more or less, or a factory or something like that. Now we go to 2 minor external changes, and that's the windows, and that's a removal of the letterbox. The letterbox is to be carefully removed and infilled with ashlar stone, which is what the rest of the building is built on. So that's good news. Right, there you go. So this has been, I think, a thoughtful matter. We're obviously very sad to lose that as the post office, but that's the way things are these days. But it looks as though they're going to do something that's architecturally okay.
So no objection.
This, again, one has to say, looks like a no objection subject to the contrary view of. Again, it seems highly unlikely, actually, from what you've seen, that he would object, because, you know, for example, putting ashlar stone in instead of something else looks as if it's going to be done pretty sympathetically, and it will probably actually improve the look of the building over where we are currently.
One of the things that I think in the future we're going to have to run up against is if it does become, as suggested, a restaurant or an indie restaurant, not that there's any difference, is a signage on a listed building, which is we keep running up against that, because it is a listed building and it is a central part of the character of that, of Amdor, in fact, that building, and the Talbot next to it. So, I mean, when they start to plaster, big signs on it and hanging signs and all the rest of it to advertise, it's going to be something that we're going to run up against. But I wonder if it's something we should think about now rather than later.
Well, I mean, we can think about it. We can only think about it, but we can only do something about it as and when and if there's a planning application. At the moment, we can only look at what's proposed. What's proposed seems to be sensible to do and seems to be being done sympathetically and appropriately.
What I mean is that, we should be aware of...
we should certainly be aware, and particularly if, for example, what has happened in a certain Chinese takeaway in New Road was suddenly to happen here, and suddenly people start doing work to that building without planning permission, I would suggest that the first thing we do is pick up the phone and tell ENC, get them to stop immediately. New Road's bad enough. That property is highly significant in the centre of the town.
Of the application for the grant for the improvement of the town centre that building featured, Downton and that respect featured quite heavily in that application. So we just, I think we owe it to ourselves to be cautious and careful about what happens to it in the future.
We should probably check our policy then, which I'm sure we had at one stage, about advertising, because, for instance, the Blue Marlin signage would not get past planning now.
I think it gets worse than that, because when the ENC had their visitor centre, do you remember the piece of plastic that went up next to the solicitor's office?
Yeah.
I mean, when you get your own planning people
Disobeying.
allowing a plastic sign to go up there, and I remember getting into a right old business about that. But
Anyway.
See, probably the ugliest thing about that is probably the telephone junction box.
Yes,
Doesn't
a
have
debate
to.
for another day. I'm going to suggest we close that one down.
And it is next to one of our grade 1 listed buildings.
Quite. That is all the planning applications that are actually on the list. But there is in fact one further application which came in late. It's a tree application. We can't get an extension,
Oh, is this
so we are going to have to look at it tonight, because if we don't look at it tonight, we won't be able to look at it, period.
Can I
And-
just say, that's all I've got.
Yes.
That is all I've got. That is.
The point about this application is this. It's a removal of a yew tree. The reason it is said that it needs to be removed from the garden of number 27 is that this tree has allegedly pushed over a boundary wall with number 26. Removal of trees has always been a potential concern. Removal of certain types of tree more so. It may well be that the tree has caused damage to the wall. I really don't know. Whether the alleviation of that issue requires removal, guess what? I really don't know. It might, but it might not.
I would have gone up there, but I never go onto private property without the permission of the owners. I'm allowed to take photographs off the highway because you are allowed to do that. We had a very similar case, if for those of us who've been planning for a bit, in the back of a Mill Road house, which backed onto a property which is just off South Bridge Road. Now, what happened was that this tree really effectively knocked it over. But that was slightly different to this, in a way, because that wall was actually the limit of our conservation area. I did a lot of research on this one, and it clearly, and the thing I would say, shall we say slightly sort of flippantly, is that walls don't grow, but trees do. Now, yews are notorious anyway for their speed of growth. Obviously, this is a tricky one because I don't think this is necessarily just down to the tree officer, because he's going to be concerned, basically, I suppose, with whether or not the tree should be chopped down. But he's got to take into consideration the situation in relationship to the boundary wall. I think this is quite tricky. I'd really like to go round there actually and talk to them and take some photographs, but I don't want to do that without getting permission.
How old is the tree and how old is the wall?
Don't know. It's
I
all I've
mean,
got.
was the wall built?
I don't know.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. Was the wall built
where
next
it
to the
would be
tree, or did somebody
understood
plant the
that
tree against a wall that's already there? The short answer is, I'm afraid, again,
Because I
It's
think
not
that's-
on there.
We don't- No.
the most annoying thing. Tree applications are
And I think
dreadfully
maybe the
short
tree
on
guy's
information.
got to look at that.
That's all I've got. That's it.
So it does say self-set trees, I mean, I don't know quite.
Oh, yeah, how do you-
It's a self-set.
If it's a large yew tree,
Well, in
you're
other
not going
words,
to be old
it-
enough to know it's self-set.
Well, I
Yeah.
don't know how they could use the word self-set,
can't.
because if it's...
So, yew trees are there for, if it's size, then it's there for a long time. They do actually grow quite quickly, but they grow faster than they grow.
They do.
Girth-wise, they become very old. Personally, I'm 100% against it. You know, no.
No what?
I
You
feel
do
like
not
you.
take yew trees out. They are one of the few trees that are now
Well, you often...
becoming endangered in this country.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. I've actually just applied
Let's have a
through. I've just applied for a book on trees, and I'm going to try and to bone up on this. But interestingly, yew trees are often found in graveyards.
Yeah, well,
Indeed, my late daughter is buried very
Yeah.
close to
They
one.
keep the witches away.
Is that what you're saying?
I,
It
think-
was brilliant.
I wouldn't be at all surprised.
Councillor Oakes.
Is there any part of this which is to do with any conservation area or anything like that?
No.
No.
This bit?
Don't believe so.
Could we get the tree officer to have a
Well, I think
deco?
what we might want to do is this, because it's the only way we can do it. We haven't got time to do
You've
some of
got
the
till
things
the
we would like,
26th of August.
because we don't have another meeting.
Yeah.
We've got 3 weeks.
There's clearly a degree of concern about the removal of a yew tree. Doubtless, we would want to make certain observations, including that raised by Councillor Chesser, i.e., if possible, does the tree officer know which came first? Because it seems to me that if you build a wall in proximity to a yew tree,
you know it's going to
you may anticipate that sooner or later you're going to have a problem with it. It may be that the answer is not known, but it seems to me that maybe the tree officer
Well,
would
the
be
offer he would
able
be
to
able to
find
do.
out, stroke the planners.
There's not enough information either, is there?
And we would want to look at, is there any we might want them to consider whether there is any alternative to complete removal, if in fact the tree is known to kind of post-date the wall. In other words, somebody put the tree in, or it self-seeded, whatever it was, in the proximity of a wall which was already there, then we might feel more inclined to agree to something being done to it, but could something be done to it short of complete removal, bearing in mind it's a yew tree? Does that...
Yeah, that's okay.
Kind of-
me.
Yeah.
What date did you say we had to get back?
26th of August.
I would really like to go up there and take some photographs.
Can I make this further suggestion then? That's our provisional approach.
Yeah.
If Councillor Oakes is able to go up there, make any inquiries, get any photographs, we will circulate it around the committee. And if, as a result of that, one or more of us wants to perhaps take a different view, all we can do is make soundings and see whether or not the response I'm suggesting remains the response in the light of further information. We can't. I'm not going to convene another planning meeting before
Can we
the
just delegate the
26th.
matter between the two of you?
If councillors are,
I'll be happy to accept your decision.
if councillors are happy enough to do that,
You see, the tree that was the one I was talking about earlier, which is a very similar thing to this, it was the roots that were causing the problem, not the tree itself. The roots just burst through and undermined the wall.
kind of the tree doesn't exist without the roots. Anyway, Councillor Glenn suggested that.
We'll go up there and have a chat.
I think it's generally thought that we don't want to demolish the yew tree.
If we can possibly find a way of avoiding it.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's,
And
Well,
that's
there
what
will
we
be
should
an
be saying.
alternative, no doubt.
We take that
you
on
could put a
board.
fence up
and-
rather than a wall.
Yeah, but back,
Councillor Oakes and I will liaise over it, and we'll let you all know what we've ultimately put in.
boundary walls though are important.
Probably
to
be
people,
along those lines.
particularly when they are affected by a neighbour.
I'm conscious of the fact that
Yeah.
there are still some items on this agenda that we want
Yeah.
to deal with. The next item.
That then.
That's the end. Thank you very much, Councillor Oakes. Planning outcomes, they're all listed. Nothing in there that makes you particularly sort of surprised. However, planning appeals. Guess what? 19 Cotterstock Road, formerly Pembroke House.
Oh, right.
Apologies to Lisa for calling it Lawn House, which is actually in Jericho and completely different property. I don't know what made me do that when I was communicating with you earlier, but anyway. Pembroke House, 19 Cotterstock Road, you know the one, been derelict for years, the Sloane's old house, partially burnt down. Application went in for a care home, and we didn't like it one bit, and we objected. It went to ENC, they didn't like it one bit, and they refused it, and that is now the subject of an appeal. We took the view when the applicants decided that they could resolve everything by knocking out 5 of the bedrooms, that actually it really didn't make any great difference. We simply reiterated everything we said, and no doubt that is exactly our same view in relation to the appeal. However, the position of Angle Town Council is clear from our original responses. I doubt we will need to do anything further, so it's more a watch this space, and we'll see. I do recall that in a conversation I had with Councillor Stern in his planning role, that he described it as the worst application he thought he'd ever seen in terms of it being inappropriate. So we'll see what the planning inspectorate make of it in due course. The next item on the agenda is to do with the planning guidance document, which a copy of which was sort of popped in front of all of us earlier. I note, by just quickly looking at it, that I don't think, in fact, it has been updated, although it should have been, to incorporate the policy on retrospective applications, which I know that we did.
And which you asked, I know you said you wanted.
Which hasn't ended up on this document, but I know that we did. There is, interestingly, a bit which I'll just read out to you in view of what we've just decided. We may not support planning applications to convert garages into living accommodation if the result of so doing would be likely to lead to on-street parking as opposed to off-street parking, which is exactly the point we were making earlier in line with our own planning guidance. The reason that we put it on is because of this issue about wanting to include some guidelines on advertising, and if I hadn't been quite so busy, I might even have actually managed to write something, but confession time, I haven't. I have a feeling, because I haven't heard anything from Councillor Oakes to suggest otherwise either, that he probably hasn't managed to do anything other than
what I've done is I've
have all his previous material.
I've just basically checked to make sure that this is up to date, and it is. I've been on the internet and had a look at it. You've got communities and local government, a guide for advertisers. You've got the control of fly posting, good practice. You've got the RNIB, who are obviously interested because they don't want A-boards
cluttering up the pavement.
Good, because I found some stuff on A-boards.
Right, there's some other bits and pieces which are not entirely relevant, and there's another little bit about oh, it doesn't matter, that's minor stuff.
Potentially borrow those.
Basically, we're going on holidays in Norfolk. When I get back, I'll see if I can type something up,
Right.
and I'll try and do what I do for the planning applications. I'll try and keep it fairly simple. But you've got 3 sort of elements to it. The first is that strictly, for example, A-boards are the responsibility of highways because they're on the pavements. We can have a view about people who stick posters here, there and everywhere, but then there's also a criminal element to this when people actually glue posters onto things like bus shelters. But it gets even more complicated than that. Now, I've actually gone around quite a lot of local councils, city councils or whatever else to see what policies they've got. And some of them are pretty draconian. Believe me, they are draconian. I mean, you know, you're likely to get, arrested, slung in jail.
Well, for one thing, people who stick A-boards around in Amble, I think they would be shocked to know that they're supposed to have got insurance to the tune of $500,000.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
To put that, including the council, we should.
But there's also rules about how far they're allowed to come
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, you know,
I think we should have it in writing.
What I'm going to suggest is this, because I think it's very difficult to do it without actually having some draft in front of you. And Councillor Oakes very kindly agreed to do it. And could you let me have a sight of it sort of once you've done it?
Well, it won't be done for
Yeah.
4 weeks.
Yeah,
Did
that's
you
all
want
right.
to look at any of those? I thought
If you want to do,
Well,
we're away anyway, so...
to be honest,
I'll tell you what, I'll have a look
I'm
at
not
those.
saying you've got enough on your plate.
No, it's fine.
Please, Councillor.
But what I'm going to suggest is simply this. We'll try and get a draft in time for the next planning meeting. If we can't manage it, we'll have to do it for the one after. What I will say is, however, that if we don't manage to...
I'd like them back.
Yes.
They cost a lot to print.
Absolutely, yeah. If we can't manage to get this on the agenda for next time, everybody's now got a copy of that. Can I suggest that we all re-familiarise ourselves with it, because we can put the planning guidance on here, because we'd always said that we would want to review it once we had progressed the neighbourhood plan and the design statement that went with it.
Yeah.
Well, the neighbourhood plan is 99% done. I mean, it's already it's heading on its way to the inspector. The design documentation now exists, so it's a good time to try and look at that to review it. And so we'll pop it on the agenda for next time, and hopefully we'll have a chance to look at it. That leaves just two matters, one of which is simply to receive an update stroke letter from Persimmon Homes. I think there's a copy that's been circulated. Councillor Oakes, you mentioned to me a couple of things that perhaps you should just mention now.
There's been some good feedback from the residents from the article that was in the Oracle, saying, well, now we understand that it is all Persimmon and not the council who are responsible. Sort of, the bit of anger has died down a little bit. They are now maintaining the cutting of the grass regularly, and the concrete, I don't know if you all know, you've seen the pictures, there were two big concrete structures which were, the drainage was going to come through. They've actually put wooden sort of casing around those now, presumably to try and protect a child falling and banging his head.
Yeah, but they've still got those boulders in the middle.
They've still got those, yeah.
The other thing is...
They haven't put a dog bin in, but I can sort that out.
Well, we'll go after them because, the residents near where we live, would be concerned about it. It's not the safest child play area in the world.
When for it, wasn't it? It was, everyone was saying it's the council's responsibility. It's not at all. It's all Charles Church or Persimmon, it's the same thing, isn't it?
Well, the other thing that's strange is that they invariably erect railings around play areas to stop dogs going in and defecating. And there aren't any railings around this. There are railings around the top bit, but that's not where the kids play. Well, that has managed to find a few plastic bags flicking in there. It's just terrible design. It just is.
How do we want to take this forward, if at all? I'm looking towards Councillor Oakes.
Sorry.
I'm just wondering where we go from here now.
Well, I think
What
we need to reply.
suggesting we should do.
Reply to the...
I think we need to reply to it in fairly strong terms, because my belief is that what they put there is very poorly designed. That's it, full stop. They've got another play area which is opposite where we live. We don't like it very much, but it's safe. Dogs can't get in. I personally bought a lock to stop the 2 gates opening, so that the kids can't open them and let dogs roam in. And I also ring up and make sure that the spring on the entrance gate is is maintained so that the door will shut properly. Now that's the point. Now I can't see how they can get away with something that's patently a complete opposite.
Can I make this, I know it's more work, but can I make this suggestion that we can have, well, I don't know which of you, but I suspect it's one of you. Could we have a draft further letter or letter to Persimmon as a follow-up to this, circulated so that we can agenda this for the next meeting as to whether and in what terms we reply. And if somebody can produce a draft of a proposed response, we will either adopt it as is, or if we want to change it, we could. And if we decide against doing it altogether, we could. But I'm inclined to say that there are still issues up there that we might want to pursue.
There's no doubt about it. There are dogs on there. There are dogs on there.
They pay 20.
And Persimmon are charging them 20 quid.
So if we step in and take more and more control of it, it should go back to the Residents Association, because they're the ones who are paying £20 a month for its upkeep and its proper installation.
That's where the letter should go to then.
But we decided as a council that we wouldn't actually take on responsibility for the open areas up there. Our lads do a fantastic job on the bits that they're not responsible for. And at least with us jumping up and down and Persimmon, we've now got, I think, a very good reputable firm who are turning up quite regularly now to keep control of the grass.
Well, that might be because the residents are pushing them harder.
It might be.
So all I'm suggesting is that there is an acknowledgement from the council to say, yes, we recognise that, blah, blah, but in fact, all of this should be directed back to the residents.
Well, I was pretty well in favour, actually, just leafleting people who live in the general area.
Can I suggest that we'll put this on the agenda for next time, and let's look at it then, because to some extent it was to receive an update, etc. We're in danger of having a debate, and it is now 20 to 9.
I'll try and find out if there is a little Residents Association form.
Any more information would help us in our deliberations.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I'm on £20 a month, but I'm getting nothing for it.
I'm going to move us on to the very last item on the agenda, which is any other relevant matters for report, and I'm simply going to go around and look at people. Councillor Glenn,
the only thing that has come up as far as our planning thing is, and I'll be very quick, is I had a couple of comments about the new boardwalk down to the river, saying, when it was mentioned, they actually mentioned it to me, and they were saying it should have disabled access, and I was very happy to say that the planning application was all about disabled access to that river frontage on the boardwalk. And they were very, very happy. So it's a sort of big slap on the back and sing our praises for doing a job properly.
Okay. Excellent. Thanks. Oh, I missed you altogether. Do you apologise? I just realised I went straight from there to there. That's because you were so keen to get away, I thought you couldn't possibly want to add anything.
When the police...
all right. I have nothing to add. I'm going to close the meeting at 20 to 9.
When the police...